You have one new message. Translating. Disney and Pixar's Hoppers is now available on Disney+.
You could say that again.
Critics are calling it Pixar's funniest movie ever and a wildly entertaining ride. Blizzard Potato. It's certified fresh and verified hot.
Now we party.
This is incredible!
Wow, I am clearing the rest of the day.
Disney and Pixar's Hoppers, now available on Disney+. Rated PG.
Starting a business can seem like a daunting task, unless you have a partner like Shopify. They have the tools you need to start and grow your business. From designing a website to marketing to selling and beyond, Shopify can help with everything you need. There's a reason millions of companies like Mattel, Heinz, and Allbirds continue to trust and use them. With Shopify on your side, turn your big business idea into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
Hello, difference makers. You are listening to A World of Difference. This is a podcast for the people who still believe that how we lead matters, that the conversations we have across difference, across cultures, across the distance between where we are and where the world needs to go can actually change things. I am Lori Adams Brown, and for over 5 years, I have been bringing global leaders, authors, and change makers to one table. 155,000 downloads, 100 countries, a top 3% podcast, and one conviction that has not changed. The right conversation at the right time with the right people shifts everything. If you are here, you are already a difference maker. And if you want to go deeper, the Difference Makers community is waiting for you at patreon.com/a world of difference. $7 a month, the price of a latte, bonus conversations, voting power, and a seat at the table where this conversation continues. The link is in the show notes. And welcome to this week's episode. I hope it inspires you. Welcome to the A World of Difference podcast. I'm Lori Adams Brown, and this is a podcast for those who are different and want to make a difference. Welcome back to A World of Difference. I'm your host, Lori Adams Brown, Strategic Transformation Executive and founder of Bravo Global Advisory, and a lifelong student of what it means to lead well across cultures, across seasons, across full complexity of life, and a life well lived. Today's conversation is one I've been genuinely looking forward to. My guest and I share something that not everyone can claim. We're both third culture kids, people who grew up between worlds, shaped by cultures that weren't quite our passport country, and carrying that beautiful, sometimes disorienting gift for the rest of our lives. I grew up in Venezuela, as many of you know, and Costa Rica for a little while, and my guest grew up in Honduras and Guatemala. She grew up in a mud hut with dirt floors and a grass roof, then a boarding school in the urban center of Guatemala City. She spent decades leading in international organizations, and now she's found her home, literally and metaphorically, in the vineyards of Sonoma County here in California. And from those vineyards, she has developed a framework for something she calls sustainable flourishing, a way of leading and living that doesn't burn you out, but builds you season by season. Susie Lipps is the creator and owner of Conversations in the Vineyard, where she facilitates transformational offsights and retreats for purpose-focused teams. She believes that everyone deserves to flourish and that the vineyard can teach us how. Susie is my very good friend, and I've stayed in her home multiple times up in Healdsburg, and she is such a deep thinker. She's brilliant. She is a very human-centered leader, and her global mindset, as well as her understanding of what it takes to lead in this moment in ways that are durable throughout time, is in so many ways really positioned for a moment like this, where we're feeling so blown from each direction with the winds of geopolitical shifts and tariffs and changes in AI and workforce transformation and so many things. Susie reminds us that some of the best leadership core competencies are grounded with very, very deep roots that go 30 feet deep, such as what we see in the vineyard. So very welcome to the show today. A very, very warm welcome to my good friend, Susie Lipps. Susie Lipps, welcome to A World of Difference. I'm so glad you're here.
It's so good to be here, Lori. Yeah, really wonderful to be with you today.
Well, you and I have been friends for a while. We have so many things in common, both the fact that we're both TCKs, which if you're new to this podcast, Maybe that's new to you. But if you're not, we talked about this quite a bit here, just the third culture kid experience for all of you listeners. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the podcast. But I have had the pleasure of knowing you here in the Bay Area, even though we both grew up in Latin America. And I've also had the privilege of being in your beautiful home up in Hillsburg in the wine country. And we're going to get into some of the things about wineries, and some of your story connects with wineries you've taken me to. And I'm really excited about having this conversation with you today and introducing you to the difference makers. My first question for you out of the gate here is, I love a good origin story. We all do. And you've built your whole framework, really, your retreats, your teaching, your life's work, really, at this point, around the vineyard as a metaphor for sustainable leadership. So take us back to your origin story of how you grew up and what led you into this whole vineyard as the metaphor. What was the moment?
Wow. Okay. Well, the very beginning of my life, I lived in Honduras. As you know, I grew up in a mud hut, literally, with a dirt floor and a grass roof. And, if you take that very humble beginnings in the dirt, if you will, and translate that all these years forward, I'm still kind of playing in the dirt. So that's kind of a fun connection from the very beginning of my life. But so I'm in wine country, but I haven't been here my whole life. Obviously, I grew up in Honduras and Guatemala, and I spent quite a bit of time around the world in the Pacific, in a tiny little country called Papua New Guinea, and also playing in the dirt there. And California, Dallas, Florida, San Francisco. We spent almost 10 years in the city, and then we ended up landing here in wine country. Sometimes I say that God banished me to wine country. Yeah, not everybody gets banished to wine country, but
It's so hard.
I know, right? But it was, it was a bit of a desert for me, because I had been so settled in San Francisco, doing really fun things, had a wonderful community, and doing stuff that was all sort of leadership related. I was running a nonprofit, I was on boards, and, doing things that felt really meaningful to me. And I was getting a degree in leadership from Fuller Theological Seminary. So I was just in the zone. And then our life fell apart in the city. My husband lost his job, and we had to leave the city. So we ended up in our tiny little weekend home here in Hillsburg. And it just felt so bad. It felt terrible to me. It felt like I had been kicked out of life. And sometimes, well, maybe you've had a little bit of that experience once or twice. So, yeah. So I got kicked out of life. And, when part of life is falling apart, the dominoes just all tend to go. So sometimes you end up with, you're just staring at the foundation of your life, and there's cracks even in the foundation. So that was my life. When we moved to Hillsburg, our marriage was falling apart. Everything was just going to hell in a handbasket, if you will. So I didn't have a lot to do. I had this fancy degree in leadership, nothing to lead. I was shutting down the organizations and moving out of things. So what do you do when you're in wine country? You drink wine, right? So I decided that I would start going through the wineries around. There's probably 200 wineries within 15 minutes of our house. So I thought, well, I'll just go alphabetically. I'll go taste wine at Armida, and then Arista, and then I just started with the A's, and I see how I go. So I was drinking a lot of wine. I guess that's a true confession, and it's okay. So I was drinking wine, going around to wineries, and I was also noticing just the rhythms of agriculture. I'm a city girl, and except for the fact that when I was in Honduras, we were in the country, but I was such a little kid then, I wasn't really paying attention. So now I'm paying attention to things look different during different seasons here. And so that's what I was doing. I was driving around wine country, was drinking wine, going to the vineyards alphabetically. And I got to Bella Winery at the end of the road. And Bella Winery is this beautiful winery. They have a wine cave. Did you go with me to Bella? I think you might have. I'm not
Yes,
sure.
we've been, and the cave is really cool.
Yeah. So here's this cave. Above the cave, there's this hill that's full of vines. And so when I got to Bella and I was sitting there drinking this beautiful Zinfandel, and the Zinfandel was made from the vines that were on the top of the hill. And they had told me that the vines were 100 years old. So I'm drinking wine from vines that were still producing good enough fruit to make really good wine 100 years after they were planted. So I just began to think, wow, what do the vines know that we could learn from the vines about sustainable flourishing, sustainable leadership, sustainable life, all those things that had been sort of rattling around my head for a number of years. It's like, how do you live long? How do you live well? What happens when things fall apart? Then what do you do? How do you continue to produce good fruit? How do you continue to lead well? And so it occurred to me that this vineyard knew something that I didn't know. And so I began to dig around, no pun intended, but just to kind of think about what I could learn from viticulture. Now, I wasn't learning a whole lot about wine. I was learning more about the vines. And it took me a number of years, really, just to correlate these sort of leadership principles, life principles, flourishing principles from the life of the vine. And that led me to create a whole beautiful program of offsights and leadership retreats in the vineyard, because I figured if this was useful to me as a leader, maybe it would be useful to other leaders too. I realized that I kind of stumbled on these principles while I was in the middle of a winter season, if you will. You call it the desert, you call it whatever you want, but I had been banished, and I was just sort of fruitless, if you will, or I thought I was. So I wondered if this might be the kind of framework that other leaders might appreciate over their life thinking about flourishing. Yeah, so that's where it all started.
Well, I love it so much. I love the image. I I love the wine. I love where you live, and I love the lived experience that you bring into all of this. This metaphor is not an artificial thing for you. It's something very visceral, very much a part of your story. And here, where we really appreciate the why behind the work people do and the authentic leadership behind it. Your story is so exactly what we want to listen to here on the podcast. So, but I know now for some of us who maybe don't spend much time in vineyards, who don't get to be banished to them, although I'm not going to minimize how hard that was, because I know you know I've got some lived experience of feeling banished at times. But what are some of the specific metaphors that you found to be helpful in your trainings around the vineyard? Maybe you could unpack one or two for us. What does the vineyard literally teach us about how to lead?
Wow. Wow. Okay. We really need a whole day for this. I'll try to keep it short. um, I have about 40 different metaphors that I've developed over the years. But I have sort of an overarching framework of sort of a 3-pillar idea or framework that I think is really important for leaders to pay attention to. And it goes to the sustainable certification that wineries receive. So, you may not know this, but wineries can receive a sustainable certification. They have to have 3 things. It's not just an environmental thing, although that's one of the things that wineries need to prove that they're sustainable because they're taking care of the environment. So a lot of times when we talk about sustainability, we think about the environment. That's a good thing. That's a good place to start. But wineries also need to be economically viable in order to get this sustainable stamp. And this one I think is so important that most people maybe don't even realize. They have to have equitable practices in how they treat their employees and the workers that work there. I love that. So environment, economics, and equity, those 3 things. So I keyed into those 3 things a little bit when I was thinking about, so what are the 3 kind of main pillars for leaders to live and lead sustainably, to flourish over a long period of time? And what I came up with as I looked across the vineyards and what they teach us, first of all, leaders have to have a purpose, a personal purpose. If you think about a vineyard has one purpose: wine. And everything that is done in the vineyard is done for that reason. Everything. The soil, the canopy management, the water, the pest control, all of that is done because the winemaker, the winery wants to make good wine. Well, we all know this is sort of a given, right? We have to have a purpose in life. Otherwise, we really won't have anything to aim for. We won't have anything to tell us what we should say no to, what we should say yes to, and so forth. So purpose is one of the things that I talk about, especially with leaders. And we use some of the metaphors from terroir to talk about that. I can get back to that in a minute. So purpose is one. Character is another main thing that I talk about with leaders. You have to be the kind of person as a leader that cares about character. You have to care about your own character first. Now, character is not the same as personality, right? Okay. So character is that part of us that actually channels our personality in ways that bring us to a place of virtue and wanting to do things that are healthy, not just for us, but for other people, right? So you have to have good character. And a lot of the metaphors in the vineyard have to do with character and how we develop character, how we deploy character in our leadership and in our life and so forth. The vineyard has a lot to teach us about that because there's so much going on internally to the vine. You know, the way the water goes up the vine and feeds the branches, the way the photosynthesis works, even the way pruning and all those kinds of things work. So purpose, character. And then the last pillar for leadership sustainability is rhythms. And this is one of the things that I learned early on as I was driving through, as I mentioned, is, look, the vineyard has a rhythm that it never veers from. It always goes from winter to spring to summer to harvest to fall to winter. You don't go from winter to harvest. You don't go from summer to winter just like that. There's one season follows another predictably. But probably the most important thing that I work with leaders on, especially in the rhythms part of these 3 pillars, is that there's always a rhythm of harvest, and there's always a rhythm of rest or dormancy. This is why we grow vines. Wine growers grow their grapes in a place in the world where there is a season of cold, where they can go dormant. We don't grow wines in the tropics. Did we have did you have wines in Venezuela? Probably not. We had coffee in the highlands in Guatemala, but no
Yep.
vines because we have wet season, dry season, but we don't have that really cold season, right? So rhythms there are macro rhythms in our life, and there are micro rhythms in our life that we need to pay attention to. So the macro seasons of our life, sometimes people talk about the macro, like, oh, I'm in the summer season of my life, I'm in the fall season of my life, whatever. That's not what I'm talking about so much. I'm talking about the more micro rhythms of life, those rhythms of life that take months, perhaps, or years, even decades, even a weekly. Often there are rhythms like that you need to engage on a weekly basis. Hey, every day we go into a bit of a dormant season, don't we? When we rest, what happens when we don't rest?
We get sick. It's not good.
It's not pretty. I mean, it's crash and burn time, right? So these are the kinds of things that I work with leaders on. And so some of the metaphors, this rhythm idea, for example, we see this not only on a macro level, on a yearly level with the vines, but on a daily level. So photosynthesis. Do you remember photosynthesis?
Yes, elementary school, it was a lot of fun to learn with the plants and everything.
Right. So you have 8th grade science or whatever. But so I take people into this photosynthesis metaphor, which is a really rich metaphor. I won't be able to get into all of it right now, but the idea here is that photosynthesis happens during the day. Here's a rhythm thing. The leaves, by the way, here's an interesting thing. We're in spring in the vineyard right now. And so the leaves are just popping out, and they're tiny. Some of them are just little bitty and they're cute. They are not doing the work of photosynthesis that feeds the vine until they get to be about as big as your hand. So a leaf on a vine needs to be, in order to contribute to the life of the vine, it needs to be about as big as your hand. So the vine itself is pushing out all of those new leaves with the energy that was stored during winter. See, if you didn't have that winter cycle, you wouldn't have the energy to push out the new leaves, because all that energy, until those leaves are big enough to support the whole process of photosynthesis in the vine, they're not doing anything until they're as big as your hand. So photosynthesis needs water and light. So we also need enough sunshine. So again, we're waiting for more sun to come out. We get the water, and that work that happens in the leaf is what feeds the vine and the fruit. So think of it this way: if you were a leaf, if you were a leader, and by the way, most vines have more than one leaf. So just tuck that one away. We got to have this community, right, of leaves to make things happen. It's not just a one-leaf show. But you imagine you're the leaf. You're the hardworking leaf. Inside the leaf, there are all these little chloroplasts. You need water and sunlight. But what is it that comes into the leaf? Is that carbon dioxide. So as a leader, you basically ingest the toxins of the world, if you will. And in the presence of water, which we use water to talk a lot about character. It comes up from your roots. It comes from the soil. It comes from those things that are really grounding you and giving you life. So in the presence of your character and sunlight as energy, or I like to think of sunlight as the truth, right? So you've got these challenges or toxins coming into your context, your leaf, but with your character and the truth of the matter, those toxins are transformed. Do we remember our photosynthesis equation? They're transformed into sugar. So the life of a leader is really, and actually all of our lives are this way, but in leadership in particular, is engaged with transformation, transforming the challenges, the toxins that come into the organization, the team, whatever, in the presence of character and truth to produce the sweetness, right? The sugars that feed the whole plant and make the fruit. And the beautiful byproduct of all this is oxygen for the world. So not only feeding your team and your fruit, but also giving oxygen to the world. So there's one little metaphor. Oh, and I was going to say this, rhythm. So photosynthesis, that's happening during the day. Every night, the leaf reverses that process. And it exhales the carbon dioxide and inhales the oxygen. So there's a rhythm even on a daily basis there with the vines. So that's just a little example. That's one of the 40 examples that we could talk about.
Well, if that's not a compelling case for people wanting to get in touch with you, I don't know what is because I mean, I nerded out on the photosynthesis and just love the whole imagery of it all. It's very visceral. These metaphors are so rich and there's so much even to unpack with that one all by itself. When we think about toxins, the role of a leader, there's so much conversation around toxic leadership right now. We're in Silicon Valley. There's just been so many shifts, even in the last year, of how work is done and leadership and those fundamental, durable leadership core competencies. Some of it's changing here and there with the winds of change of how, AI is coming into things and all of that. But at the same time, I had a conversation with somebody this morning who's just a very well-known, actually, she's been on the podcast, Dr. Edie Goldberg, and she's very well-known in the HR world, has been the chair of the SHRM Foundation. She's a good friend, and we were just, chatting about there's been almost a resurgence of a conversation around leadership development in this moment, which makes us happy because if you forget that part, if you forget the role of this, it's so like you said, the oxygen for the world. I feel like that was a bit of a mic drop moment because leadership is more than one leaf on it. It's also the seasons. It's everything you're unpacking with all these metaphors. So I want to dig into it a little bit for a moment because you pointed this out to me. Joseph Campbell famously said, if you want to change the world, you have to change the metaphor. So that's a strong claim. So help us understand, how deep do our internal metaphors go? How do they actually shape the way we lead, the decisions we make, the way we see ourselves? And can you give us some real examples maybe of metaphors that might be quietly ruining someone's leadership, maybe without them even knowing it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Going back to what you were saying about in Silicon Valley, we have this sense that competence is going to win the day. Actually, MIT Sloan did a research at one point, and what they discovered was that actually companies whose leaders are described by the employees as having character, and especially characters of integrity and forgiveness, when employers describe their leaders that way, those companies ended up on the scale of a 5x of fruitfulness. I use the vineyard metaphor, but their business is 5x what other businesses were who did not have character at the top levels of leadership. So character matters. And the reason we talk about metaphors and characters, because our character is what channels our personality. It's not easy to want to develop your character, right? And so, because it's hard, character is really developed in a crucible, right? Character's not developed in a baby cradle. Well, the metaphoric baby cradle. Not that little lovely place where you sit and everything's comfortable. No, character's developed in places where it's tough. Things are hard. You have to make hard decisions. So here's the thing. And this is where metaphors are so important. If we have a framework of a metaphor that is very mechanistic, or even aggressive, you end up with a sort of a deformed character, if you will, right? It creates a structure that doesn't allow for this organic sense of your personality to grow and flourish. Things get truncated, things get cut off. So other studies about metaphors, like there's a whole book I'm reading, it's sitting around here somewhere, but metaphors we lead by. And it was written by some guys in Sweden who were doing this study on leaders and different ways that people lead. There's lots of different ways we lead. And honestly, we lead differently according to the different situation that we're in. We're going to employ different tactics. But at our core, if we have a metaphor that is guiding our leadership, if we have a metaphor that is organic and something that creates a framework on which other things can grow, then we have something that is useful not only to us, but to the whole organization. So if you want to be a cyborg, as one of the types of leadership that they have in this book, that's just very mechanistic, and sometimes it calls for that. If you're an EMT, or you just need to make fast decisions and you cannot be second guessing anything, why then there's room for that. But to have a metaphor that carries us through the distance, it has to be something that's has a little bit more life-giving, growth-minded sort of a metaphor. There was a study done about people who were cancer survivors. And what they discovered about people who flourished after cancer is that they had an internal metaphor that they leaned into that was a more organic metaphor than sort of this aggressive, I'm going to hit it, I'm going to go through this thing. I mean, even just saying that, thinking about our world today, simple thought, if we could imagine an expansive metaphor that includes life and flourishing, what a difference that would make, not just in our companies, but in our world, I would say.
So true. Um, the word aggression has been thrown around itself by leaders here in Silicon Valley on famous podcast interviews. Last January, I'm thinking of one in particular with Mark Zuckerberg. And at the same time, some of the leaders of our world are using aggression in a way that I don't see as leadership, honestly. Like it gets thrown around with the word leadership, but to me, it's a lot of weakness, I think, because especially with all the metaphors you're unpacking around the vineyard. I mean, you can't have an aggressive vine and come up with something as delicate and as wine that's cultivated over 100 years, right? And so all of it is so integrated and organic, and all the metaphors that you're using, I think are so, so powerful
Mm.
and so too quickly dismissed in the way at least we're seeing here in parts of the Bay Area where fast is valued over slowing down to really make good decisions. And you mentioned the MIT Sloan research, and I saw your newsletter about that recently, and we kind of interacted a little bit around it because I loved that you quoted it. I love that MIT Sloan even recognized it because it feels as though character is something that was discussed much earlier in my career, and it feels as though it's no longer
Yeah.
something people really discuss because we've sort of normalized a lack of character development, that fast is better. Burnout culture is the norm in so many places. And yet we have even good research around, and I've seen some stuff in Harvard Business Review around this, your decision-making ability that really diminishes when you don't slow down, when you don't recognize how the vineyards are operating. And so what you do is this beautiful thing where you bring people in to slow them down, to help them see in very visceral ways. So I want to bring people into your world for a moment. You facilitate these leadership offsites in retreats in actual
Mhm.
vineyards.
Mhm.
So walk us through it a little bit. Who comes? What does the day look like? What do people experience in that setting they wouldn't get in a conference room?
Oh.
And, what do you actually see change? What really shifts in people when they're out of that very fast-paced
Mm.
decision-making environment?
Well, your blood pressure goes way down as soon as you get out in nature. We all know this to be true. And it's a way of slowing down our processes long enough to be able to notice what's really going on in life. It's true that when we talk about a metaphor, like, look, we're in the middle. We're the thing about being in the vineyard is like you're literally in the middle of the metaphor. It's a very sort of embodied. It's an elegant kind of exposure to a particular topic to actually be in the topic, right? So it's really fun being in the vineyard, and and honestly, I've had so many groups. I usually work with teams. I work with executive teams or boards, internal teams. I like to work with teams that already know each other because then we don't have to go through the whole get to know you thing. I've done that a few times too, but it's better working with an intact team. But they get to the vineyard and we're able to talk about things that might have been a little hard to talk about in the office. I'll give you an example. Let's just say that somebody on your team had to be dismissed for some reason, and nobody can talk about what that reason is because, legally and all that kind of stuff. So, but people are kinda mad about it because they can't know about it, and there's just a lot of, like, grief and anger and some sadness and not people not knowing what to do. So I had a team come, and we sat in the vineyard. It happened to be just right at the beginning of spring after winter pruning, so we could see the effects of the pruning, things getting cut off, things that were no longer going to be fruitful, and so there was a good lesson about that. And right at the end of winter, right before spring, the vine actually weeps. And what I mean by that is the vine pushes out some water. A vine can weep up to a gallon of water, and it pushes out the sap, some and some minerals that heal the wounds of the pruning. So here we were at that time of year with this group, and we were just talking about the vines, right? About how things had been cut off and how it looked kind of sad, but the vines would weep and they would heal the wound and so forth. And so what happens is when you're talking about a metaphor, people open up about what's actually happening, right? Because you're not hitting it. You're not saying, all right, everybody, we're going to talk about the grief that you're experiencing. And we're going to do it right now. No, we're talking about the vine. We're talking about the vineyard. And so when you approach a topic in an oblique manner, it often opens up uh, more fruitful conversations, which is what happened with this group. And they were able to kind of talk about their loss and what was happening and why they felt angry about it and so forth. I had one group come last summer, actually an AI company. There's no AI in the vineyard. Um, but so I had this company there and we talked about photosynthesis, like I just mentioned. And and this was a really important topic for them. They were dealing with some toxins. They were dealing with some challenges that were coming into their team. And so as they were leaving, we always have take it home. What are you going to do with this? How are things going to change? And basically, one of the things that they said was, okay, we understand that dealing with challenges and toxins is complicated, like photosynthesis is very complicated. But now we have language when we go back to the office and we have something come up that we need to talk about. We're just going to say to each other, we got to have a photosynthesis conversation. And see, what happens is that a metaphor, just saying one word, can tell a whole story. And everybody understands the story. If a picture paints 1,000 words, a metaphor paints 1,000 pictures, if you will. So metaphors are helpful. We're sitting in the vineyard. We walk in the vineyard. We enjoy a lovely lunch, wine. If people are interested in wine, we also have other things if we don't want to drink wine. But yeah, so it's just it's a beautiful opportunity to actually walk in the vineyard. I have games that we play or activities, art activities that we do. A lot of companies already know this, that when they do something different with their brains sort of kick on a little bit better and creativity comes back. We know this to be true, but then we just sit there in front of our computers all day and, try to get creative. Well, that's, so yeah, that's kind of what it looks like. I'll just say this. I have a half-day program, a full-day program, and a multi-day retreat. I also travel. I've been around the world doing this. I've been in South Africa, where there's beautiful vineyards, and even Texas. So if there's a vineyard, we can have this conversation anywhere. So, yeah.
Love it. And it's so true that, I've sat in conversations with leaders of big companies here in Silicon Valley bringing a return to office under the guise of more productivity, and yet just bringing people together in front of screens to be on video calls with Type A or wherever does not actually do the kind of innovation. What you're saying is you're activating right brain, and we know this from the neuroscience, right? That there is something about being outdoors. I love that research. The other intersection of this podcast is the travel piece, where people love to travel. A lot of the ones that listen or who have lived abroad, and there's some really great research about just getting out of town and what it does for your. Even if it's just from where I live here in Los Gatos, getting to Hillsburg, I know how I feel when I show up at your house, not only because your house is beautiful, but just being out of town is part of it. And it does activate parts of your brain for innovation. And if you're bringing your team, just a short drive up from, San Francisco or San Jose or wherever to be in the wine country and to experience this together, I can only imagine the kind of innovation that happens on a team. And if you're adding in these right brain activities, I had one of my seminary professors told me years ago in Mill Valley, something that's always stuck with me is that teams that eat together, drink together, pray together, and play together are really stick together, and you can get so much done. And the prayer part doesn't necessarily have to be an actual prayer. It's just something spiritual. And it sounds like no matter what people's religion is, or if they have, don't even practice a religion, like many don't, that there is something deeply spiritual about connecting with others in the vineyards, and what you're bringing out, I think, is really beautiful. I'd really love for people to know how to find you, though, and to contact you if they want to know more. So let us know.
Yeah. So I'm at conversationsinthevineyard.com. It's long, but conversationsinthevineyard.com. And have a blog that goes out. I know it's old school blog. I actually am starting a Substack, but don't go there yet. We'll find that shortly. Anyway, I send something out about once a month. If you are a person that ascribes to the Christian faith, we have a Lent meditations every year that come out and really highlight the vineyard and all the things that we see in the Bible around the vineyard. So that's always a welcome topic for folks who are of that particular faith. But I serve all people, all types of people. Just being in the vineyard is such a wonderful experience for everybody. I can't tell you how refreshing it is. I had one guy come. He's like, "Oh, it's all about the fractals." I was like, "Wow, fractals." You know, I'm learning about fractals, but fractals are just all of the patterns in
Mm,
nature, right? Yeah,
mm,
we need to get into nature. We need
we
to
do.
see these beautiful patterns and just the beauty that actually it stamps into our soul in ways that is just um it just enlarges our imagination. It's expansive. It expands our creativity and our imagination and there's just don't we all deserve to flourish in this way?
We do. And with the rates of anxiety so high in Gen Z, the epidemic levels,
Mm.
I actually there was research out of Berkeley that I read this last week, and it said they studied what emotion was the antithesis of that. And I expected it to be joy or something along those lines, but it's actually awe. And they say
Wow.
you experience that best in nature. And I was like, yes, that's why I love the beach. That's why I love to be outdoors. That's when you have this a moment of awe, it really dissipates a lot of the anxiety. And I think we understand it viscerally. So I think what you're doing is so important,
Yeah.
especially as our world gets just wilder and wilder and leadership is changing in some really exciting ways, but also some ways that we need to pay attention to. So thank you for being on the show today. I'm going to have you hang out in a bit with our difference makers, where I'm going to ask you more in-depth questions about being a third culture kid and growing up among cultures and worlds and how that formed your understanding of leadership. But thanks for being on the show today, Susie.
What a privilege. It's so fun to be with you, Lori. Thanks for doing this. You're doing awesome work sharing this with everybody, and I just appreciate being on here. Thanks.
Thanks, Susie. This has been so rich with Susie, hasn't it? The vineyard as a framework for sustainable flourishing. I think a lot of listeners, you difference makers out there, are going to return to this conversation more than once. But before I let you go, I want to make sure you understand where you can find her. She said Conversations in the Vineyard. Please look her up. Subscribe to her Substack. It'll be ready soon. And for everyone listening, if this conversation moved something in you, please share it with a leader in your life who needs to hear it. Leave us a review at aworldoftdifferencepodcast.com. And it takes just 2 minutes, but it really helps this show reach the people who need it the most, leaders out there who are trying to find their way. And if you want to go deeper, including the bonus conversation I just had with Susie, join us on Patreon at patreon.com/aworldofdifference, where I ask her to go a little deeper about what she learned as a third culture kid growing up and how that plays into the metaphors that she has been building today through Conversations in the Vineyard. It is one of those, whether you are a TCK or not, the wisdom that she shares, the depth of insight, the brilliance, the way she brings her global mindset into that conversation in a very self-aware way, is very much worth the leadership conversation to join us there to understand her perspective in a much deeper way. I came away feeling inspired and understood and really longing to have more conversations with Susie because she's just a great person to talk to with a lot of depth and insight that I personally have really grown from in my own personal experience of just sitting around meals with her, drinking a glass of wine in the wineries up around her house in Healdsburg, and even just in conversations in San Francisco at a conference we recently were at together that she invited me into called Disrupt HR, which was a lot of fun. So until next time, keep making a difference in your corner of the world. I'm Lori Adams Brown, and this is A World of Difference. Thank you, difference makers, for being here. Not just for listening, for being the kind of person who shows up for conversations just like this one, because you believe the world gets better when we understand each other more. And that is who difference makers are. And you are one of them. There are 2 ways to go even deeper. On Patreon at patreon.com/aworldofdifference. For $7 a month, you get bonus conversations and community. 25 gets you into the room where the real talk happens, live every quarter with me directly. On Substack, paid subscribers get full essays, no paywall, and a monthly live conversation where I say the things I can't say anywhere else. Links to both of those are in the show notes, and I would love for you to join me in both of those places. If this episode stayed with you, share it with 5 people you know who need this right now. That is how we grow this, and that is how we grow ourselves at the same time. I am Lori Adams Brown. Until next time, difference makers, go keep making a difference.